Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nicole DiNicola, and I am with Smartcat. I lead our marketing organization here, and I'm so excited to have you for this next series of our learning webinar series. We have a very exciting topic today. Before I dive into that, just a couple of quick housekeeping items to go over so that you know what to prep for and what's available to you, and it also allows people to roll into the webinar. First, we are going to be providing a recording of the session, so you will get the materials from today. You don't have to worry about taking rigorous notes or screenshots of anything. That will all be available to you. Also, throughout our session, please feel free to use the Q&A function of our webinar. Put in questions as they come, fire them in there, and there will be time at the end for us to answer anything that's top of mind for you. And thank you to those who have already submitted questions ahead of time. We do have those in our list, but please don't shy away from adding any more as we go through our discussion. So with that, I am so excited to welcome you today to our topic. Our webinar today is around agents, assistants, automation, really unlocking your potential in the AI-powered workplace that we're all trying to navigate today. We know today that 92% of companies plan to boost their AI investments over the next 3 years. I'm sure many of you are trying to figure out how to master AI, but we're still experiencing a struggle, right? 74% of us do struggle to realize the value from these initiatives. And only 1% of organizations currently consider AI initiatives fully mature, right? We need to move faster and really upskill in this area. So I'm so excited that we have JD Dillon here on our webinar. He's a renowned expert on frontline learning and employee engagement. And he's going to help us explore how L&D professionals can really bridge that gap between the promise we all want to see from AI and how we can actually use it in our organizations. So with that, I'll hand it over to JD.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everybody. If you're joining us live, thanks so much for hanging out. If you're watching the recording, where were you? And what did you have for lunch today? Before we dive into a conversation about AI, I just kind of want to set a tone, a vibe, as you will, for the conversation. I want to be a mellow conversation today, as much of a conversation as we can have via the Zoom. Now, why mellow? Is it because I'm recovering from dental surgery? It might be. That might be. But more importantly, just to kind of take the temperature down a little bit from the hype and the oh my gosh and the how do you not understand AI yet? Everyone else is getting value. Why am I not? That type of conversation that is kind of swirling around what is clearly the biggest conversation in the workplace, inclusive of the HR function, learning and development function, as well as just kind of the consumer technology space as well. So I want to dive into the AI and learning and development conversation with you today. I've got some thoughts and perspective to share, and then hopefully spend a bunch of time in the end of our 45 minutes answering questions. So as Nicole said, drop your questions into the Q&A. We've got a bunch of questions already teed up from those of you who signed up to join early. And then if you have any comments or want to share your own perspective, your experience, also feel free to share that in the chat. Spoiler alert, I do not have all the answers to this conversation, but I also firmly believe that no one does. So that's why I think it's important to have these kind of informed discussions about how the function of learning in the workplace is meaningfully evolving and frankly evolving whether we're ready for it or not. So as introduced, I'm JD. I've worked with AI in my practices as both a learning and development practitioner, as well as a member of the technology community for the better part of the last 10 years. Simple example, this is what happens on screen when you drop your resume into an AI image generator and say, give me a visual representation of what I've done with my life. That's what AI thinks I am. So I came out of movie theaters and theme parks. I used to be an operations manager before I got into learning and development during my time with the Walt Disney Company. I managed learning technology and development at Kaplan, the world's largest education company, and have been on the technology side of the world for the past 9.5 years in my role as chief learning architect at Exonify. So I'd say the commonalities in my career are one, supporting and enabling frontline workers, and two, the leaning into advancing technologies as a critical part of that conversation. Because if anyone here supports a frontline workforce, it's a large group. You have limited resources. People are difficult to reach, on the move, not sitting behind computers. So getting creative with and advancing kind of your strategy around technology is a critical part of supporting a frontline workforce in any industry. And that really led me down the path of understanding how we can apply technology inclusive of AI more and more creatively and strategically in the work that we do. So in my practices every day, in all of the work that I do, I barely go an hour without touching AI, for lack of better consideration. So I use a wide variety of different tools in my day-to-day work. So, simple example, if you've ever watched a video short from me, you'll notice the captioning is being automatically generated by AI. Sometimes for videos, I don't even show up and I deploy my avatar. In this case, you don't even know what language I'm speaking, because that's the cool part of this technology is that on the internet, I can speak almost any language at this point, at least in a recorded format. And if some of you saw what's coming in Google Meet coming soon, we're getting to the point where we can live translate our voices in conversations. So again, a lot of things to be excited about as long as we think strategically about this conversation. I also have a custom GPT that I use as a digital writing assistant. So there are a lot of different tools out there that you can use to help improve your writing. They're the Grammarly's of the world. Gemini is embedded inside of the Google Suite, right? A lot of different options to do these different types of things. In my case, I built a custom GPT because not only does it know how I sound, it knows what I know because it is operating off of 1 million words of my written content from over the years. So again, just simple examples of the kind of litany of different ways that AI has embedded itself into my day-to-day workflow. Now, as I said, I'm not a computer science expert. I'm more on the application and strategic side of using technology inclusive of AI to help people do their jobs better. That's what I do. But so if you have any questions, any curiosities about anything associated to this topic, again, please drop it into the Q&A. Happy to go where the conversation takes us at the end when we dive into questions submitted before the session, as well as those submitted during our conversation today. But if there are one thing I was going to if I'd said, what's this conversation about? Or what's the thesis? Or what I really want to drive home during our time together? I really want to go after this particular statement. You might have heard this one. The idea that AI will not take your job, someone using AI will. No. I fundamentally don't agree with that statement. In fact, I think if you operate based on that perspective, it's not setting you up for success in terms of how the world and the world of work is evolving around us. So if you've heard this one before, or if people have been speaking to you in this way, or maybe your team is kind of adopting this type of mentality, I challenge you through the next 30 minutes or so to think a little bit differently about the impact that AI is going to have and how we can reframe that impact within the broader context of the workplace. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look at the workplace for just a split second. So I pulled a bunch of different research over the last couple of weeks associated to kind of where are we as a workplace? What's the context into which we're inserting these new types of technologies and new types of experiences? And if you look across the board, I mean, it's a picture of struggle, right? Employee engagement's pretty much at all-time lows as long as we've been measuring it. Not to say it was ever great. It's kind of just bounced around the same number for the past 20 years, but it's not going particularly well right now. Job satisfaction's declining. About half of people are highly satisfied with their jobs. Significant burnout within the workplace. You might know what that feels like in terms of just kind of driving that do more with less type of situation that we've been in for the last several years at least. And at the very bottom of this chart, you can see people's concern around AI and the impact of their jobs. Because again, I think we see a lot of headlines. We see a lot of FOMO or hype. There's a lot of people, especially on the technology side of the world, with big promises. And we're talking about general intelligence. And even just yesterday, OpenAI released a new reasoning model and was talking about the capabilities of AI moving into next year. So there's just a lot. Meanwhile, you have a job to do, I assume. Right? It's cool that you're spending 45 minutes with me today, but you've got a list of things you have to get to, and you've got to figure out, well, how does this change the picture for me? What should I be focused on? What should I be learning? So actually, at the ATD International Conference a couple of weeks ago, I asked everyone in the room with me, just kind of how you doing, right? With this kind of state of the workplace, with this pace of change, with this amounts of questions and not necessarily as many answers, kind of where are you? And this is where everyone kind of landed, which was an interesting kind of self-reflection exercise, just to say, well, in my profession right now as a learning and development practitioner, about a quarter are excited about what's to come, the opportunities in front of us, inclusive of AI. Half are trying to figure out where this sits, and then the other quarter are somewhere between not quite sure how it's going, and then some people are frightened. scared of what these changes mean for them and for the work that they do every day, which is perfectly understandable and perfectly easy to empathize with. I'm somewhere on the spectrum in this conversation. Sometimes it changes day to day based on the work that I'm doing and how I'm thinking about, my career and the work that my company does moving forward. So I think, like I said in the very beginning, it's important to kind of pause the tech side of the conversation for a moment, take a step back and kind of see where you are, see kind of where your company is, right, where your industry is right now, so that we can properly reframe the conversation, because that's what today's about. We're not going to dive deep into tech in this conversation. If you have questions about technology, happy to dive in that direction. I think part of the challenge with AI is that it's similar to a lot of conversations we've had around learning tech for a long time, because I'll still hear people ask the question, which is the best learning management system? The answer is no, right? Because it's never about the best, or it's always about the right, right? What's the right fit solution for the problem that you're trying to solve? And that those solutions over the past 20 to 30 years continue to evolve as the broader technology conversation evolves. So I think it's important to not get focused on the tools, because the tools are changing so quickly. The models are changing so quickly. And what we're capable of is changing so quickly. 2 years ago, there was no way I could present online in a language that I don't understand and cannot speak. And today I can do those types of things. So it's more about a reframe in our session today. How do we take the disruption that we are likely to face as learning and development professionals and as learning and development functions and reframe that disruption as an opportunity, as long as we are, again, bringing the right mindset and kind of tackling this conversation from the right perspective from the start, and not either waiting for someone to tell us where we need to go, or so distracted by the hype and the FOMO and cool tools that we don't chart our path forward strategically as professionals or as a function. So those are kind of the two lenses I want to take on our conversation. Is one, thinking about the function of learning at work. How is that changing? Already, this is not a future conversation as much as this is already happening. And how do I start aligning with the change? So how do we think about the function of learning at work and then our individual roles? And of course, you may be a manager, you may be an executive, you may be an instructional designer or a content developer, an administrator. How do we start to think about the work that we're going to do in service of the evolving learning and development function? So that's the purpose and kind of the framework for today's conversation. Hope that makes sense. Again, thanks so much for joining me. Let's dive in so we can make sure we've got time for your questions. So when I talk about kind of transformation in the workplace, right, the pace of change and how we keep up, there's three lenses I like to look at change through. And I already kind of gave you two of them. And spoiler alert, at the end of today's conversation, I'm going to give you the download code for a 12,000 word handout. It's a new chapter to my book that I wrote after the AI conversation kind of blew up and ChatGPT's release. And it includes a lot of the perspective I'm talking about today. So not only do you get the recording, you also get the secret download code for the infamous additional chapter of the modern learning ecosystem. So hang out for that as well. But the three lenses I think it's important to consider when you think about any large scale change in the workplace, and that includes the transformation through AI, is to look at it from an individual perspective. How does this impact me? How do I need to evolve? The function in which I work. How does the function need to change? And then the organization overall. How is work shifting? And what I think is important is we understand how those three pieces nest together, how they inform one another, so that we're not on an island or operating inside of a silo or making decisions that are not going to be aligned with our partners in the future, or worst case scenario, waiting for someone else to tell us how to change and then not being able to participate or inform that change, right? Just being told in the ultimate version of order taking, what do you need me to do? So how do we inform the change moving forward? So we're going to kind of start from the outside and work our way in when it comes to the way that change is going to impact or is impacting learning and development practitioners. That starts at the organizational level, because the company decides what work has to be done. Right. That's where everything begins. That's where decisions are made. That's where strategy is defined. And if you look at organizations right now, there's a balancing act taking place, because you may work in a financial services firm and maybe you're still just kind of waiting for approvals when it comes to AI. I hear a lot of conversation around, I'm interested, but I'm not allowed to. Right? There's a lot of red tape. We haven't received approval yet. Or maybe you work in a technology company and you are running as fast as you possibly can down the path of you've kind of blown past generative AI and you're having meaningful conversations about agentic AI and automation and these types of things. And then the rest of the group is somewhere in the middle of that conversation because every business right now is trying to strike this balance. There's the FOMO and the opportunity and the outcomes, the potential, what this technology can do for us to help us achieve our goals. But then there's the risk associated to it, whether that be associated to privacy, whether that be associated to data security, um, people being concerned about making too much of a big bet, maybe not making a big enough bet. Right? What decision do I make when the technology is changing on an almost daily basis? And there's not really a blueprint for this, right? There's not really necessarily a team to follow, although big tech is shaping a lot of the conversation in terms of how they're running their businesses. But kind of where do I go and how do I make sure I strike the right balance so I don't introduce too much risk and I get the level of outcome that I, my executive team, my shareholders, and stakeholders are looking for, but not make the wrong move. And that's why you see a lot of headlines right now. And Nicole spoke to it earlier that while there's a lot of promise, a lot of hype around AI, we're seeing a lot of maybe failure rate increasing where organizations aren't quite getting the outcomes from AI enabled projects. You're not seeing that value. Organizations that very publicly made some big bets early on, maybe sliding back a little bit when it comes to the balancing act between people and technology in their workplaces. So we're kind of in that dip right now. If you look at kind of the typical hype cycle, right, there's that peak of expectation, then we kind of come down to reality, and then we figure out where this is actually going to land us. And I like making a comparison. Where we are today with AI reminds me a lot of where another technology was about 4 years ago at this point. Have you been to the grocery store lately? Self-checkout, right? If you remember about 2021, for reasons, self-checkout dominated in a lot of spaces in retail, especially in the grocery store, where you went from having 10 checkout lanes to now maybe 2 lanes staffed by an employee, and then a large amount of do it yourself when it came to self checkout terminals. And then if you fast forward to today and you go to the grocery store, you go to retail stores, you'll notice self checkout's still there, but some of it's been pulled back, right? Maybe you went from having 2 staffed checkout lanes, now you have 5. You still have self checkout, but it's not entirely self checkout because, while organizations were excited about the opportunity this technology represented when it came to cost savings and labor hours, as well as efficiency and delivering a customer experience, in terms of accelerating time while you're in the store, there are 2 major factors that related to that pullback. One, customer experience. Not everyone likes self checkout, especially people who might go to the store for more of a social interaction. People might want to chat with the person behind the counter, not just make it about get out as fast as you can. Or if you have a large order, right? You ask the question of, do I work here or can someone help me with this? And then loss prevention was the other major consideration, is that people walked out with a lot of stuff. And despite the introduction of sensors and cameras and all of these different factors, it's still a difficult balancing act there as well. Again, risk and the outcome. So self-checkout, I think, is just an interesting comparison of how organizations sometimes might lean in one direction versus the other, maybe have to come back towards the center to find the balance of what this technology can actually do to meaningfully drive outcomes and not accidentally go so far as to allow risk to wildly override the value that we could see. But that said, when you look at the organizational perspective and how senior stakeholders within your business are thinking about the value of AI across the organization, which would include your function in HR, learning, and development, I think there's a couple key things to consider. Is that one, 92% of executives still plan to majorly invest. There's a lot of money going into AI across the board, whether it's within organizations. We're seeing IT budgets increase considerably year over year right now because organizations are trying to unlock the potential that they've heard so much about or that their shareholders are very interested in seeing. So a lot of investment being made in the space. There's an expectation then for a return. Right? If I'm going to put a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of budget into something, it's going to have to come with that outcome. And I'm going to make decisions to inform that outcome. There's still a considerable struggle to figure out where this fits, kind of like the self-checkout comparison. And there's an increasingly less quiet acknowledgement about the potential impact to people. And we've seen some organizations already making active decisions. I can tell you that I've been in conversations where people have just made simple decisions to say, well, if maybe I was going to hire 3 people, now with certain types of tools available, certain types of automation available, I'm able to move more quickly. Maybe instead of hiring 3 people, I might need to hire 2 now. So there's a meaningful conversation about the impact that technology is going to have on people, which again is not new in the span of technology, but I think it's getting a little bit louder. And I think anyone out there who has been searching for a new role in L&D in the last 2 years or so, you are feeling the impact of this, whether it's being said out loud or not, is that organizations are rethinking their people strategies in service of what value technology can provide. And I think the challenge for L&D professionals is to make sure that we are part of the conversation so that the world doesn't change around us without us informing the future of both our roles and our function. Because if we are reactive, or if we kind of take the posture of a service provider in this conversation and wait for someone to tell us when we're allowed to change, the world might move faster than we're able to catch up. So that brings me to the second piece, which kind of lands home a little bit closer, which is function. So how is AI already shifting the nature of learning at work? And as a result of that, the role that learning and development as a function plays. So let's do a bit of a before and after. Traditional legacy learning and development, how a lot of L&D functions continue to exist today. On one side, you have the people who know, right? The people who have information, have priorities, have projects, have things that need to get done as part of people's day-to-day performance. On the right side, you have the people who do the work, right? The audience, the people who need that information, who need the training, develop knowledge and skill to execute on the plans and strategies and priorities set by the people on the left. And in the middle of that conversation sits the learning and development function. And we play a connecting role, right? We use our data, our technology, our content, our resources to get the information from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen through instructional design practices, content development, project management and execution, all the different things we do as an L&D function. But in the traditional model of L&D, there's a couple of challenges. One, I've yet to meet the L&D team that has all the time and all the money. So we have a natural limitation to what we can do. We can only chase so many problems and work on so many projects. And as a result, that leaves people behind, whether it be people on the right that we just can't prioritize because of what else we have going on. There's so many compliance things we have to deal with. We can't help everybody in the way that we would like to. Or sometimes we leave people on the left behind because we can't keep up with the demands of stakeholders. And sometimes they walk around us and they do their own thing. Or sometimes they get frustrated and that impacts people's perspective on the value of learning and development in the workplace. You've likely been there. So how does this change in an AI-enabled workplace? Well, we're already starting to see that the people on the left and people on the right don't necessarily move, right? There's still people who know and then people who need. The question becomes, how do they come into contact to support and enable not just their side of the equation, but one another? And that's where I believe we're seeing more and more the ecosystem enabled by AI step in. So instead of it having to be a function that sits in the middle of these groups of people, it's now about how do I connect through the ecosystem of the workplace to get the support that I need. So maybe on the left-hand side, you have someone that has a new product spec, right? You're releasing a new product in your organization. Traditionally, I might have to hand that to learning and development to develop training on it, to then deploy to the people on the right. Well, now if I have AI-enabled tools that I can leverage, I can take that product information, use AI to break it apart into a wide variety of resources, whether that includes a job aid, a wiki article, a digital assistant that can answer questions for employees, a summary video, all the different things I can do to make sure the people on the right are enabled. I can leverage the ecosystem to do that. And then the people on the right-hand side, instead of just being passive kind of receivers of information and training, well, I can engage in the ecosystem as well because I can go ask questions. Instead of having to rely on the people around me to do my best work, I can maybe even share my insights back into the ecosystem. And that data can be more effectively leveraged by the people on the left to inform their decisions and their strategies. So I believe we're getting less and less about working with functions and more about working with an interconnected ecosystem. Underneath that ecosystem is what I'm calling ecosystem enablement. The people and the processes and the practices that are going to make these connections work. So that people are working with the right information, reliable information and insights. The ecosystems leveraging the latest and greatest technology to help people foster these connections. So I believe this is kind of how the model is changing. And if you just kind of take an example of that, the most common example I could think of when it comes to L&D processes, an SOP update. Right? Again, traditionally, stakeholder brings you the new documentation. You have to figure out what people need. You do a task analysis. You deploy some type of content. Maybe some of that content is meant to check a box. Some of it's meaningfully meant to improve performance. You execute. You report back to the stakeholder. Well, if you introduce kind of the agentic AI world onto this idea of, well, how do we execute an SOP? Well, maybe now we're talking about an interconnected web of agents. Maybe you have a content agent. Again, I'm talking theoretically here, but these are the types of tools that organizations are building right now. So maybe instead of a person having to do those updates, I just use a content agent that takes the new SOP, looks at all of our published content, whether it be training, job aids, resources, and determines, well, what has to change, and maybe even makes those changes for you instead of you always having to do that work manually. You might have a training agent that determines, well, how does this change in the SOP impact people based on what they do? So instead of mass releasing training to everyone who might need it, well, how does this nuance impact you versus this other part of the SOP impact a different employee? And then make adjustments to how I support people through the change. You might have a digital assistant where, again, people can go for information, maybe get nudges and reinforcement and kind of practice opportunities, but have a connection point where I can actually engage with the information instead of having to rely on people to get me the latest update. And then maybe even a performance agent that analyzes the outcomes related to the SOP to determine, are people actually doing what we ask them to do, right? Are we seeing the outcomes associated to increases in sales, improvements in safety or customer satisfaction, reductions in errors, right? Whatever the change in process was meant to drive an outcome for, well, how can we see if that's working? And then use that insight to inform changes in documentation, changes in training, changes in how a digital assistant answers a question. So I believe this is the type of world we're rapidly moving towards. We're working with an interconnected web of tools that help us automate pieces and parts of the processes that we're often involved directly in as L&D. Now, yes, there might be a person involved in some of these conversations, maybe even a lot of these conversations, right? If anything on the screen is related to a compliance topic, there's likely a legal review happening. Does legal also have an approver agent that will do some of that work for them? Potentially, right? So I'm not saying this completely eliminates the person from the equation, but it fundamentally changes how we work through the processes of the types of things that we've been doing in a certain way for a very long time as learning and development. And as a result, I believe this will challenge L&D to think about, well, how do we construct our teams, our functions, what people do, and how many people do we need to do it? So again, this is just a generic look at how a lot of L&D teams kind of resource the L&D function today. We lean in the direction of delivery. You often have more people on the content development and execution side. You might have some people dedicated to strategy, administration, technology, program management. Maybe you have dedicated resources for data and curation, depending on the size of your function. You might be a party of one, and you do all this stuff. Right? But generally speaking, maybe this is how you kind of split your time as a department of one in some cases. I believe this is going to rapidly change in a world where we're going to have less resources dedicated to development and delivery and more dedicated to infrastructure, right? More people thinking about technology, data, curation, less focus on reporting because a lot of that can be automated out. So I think the visual of what an L&D function is changing. And yes, you will notice that if you go back and forth between these two screens, there are less people, because I believe that is part of the conversation is how do we maximize our own efficiencies and capabilities as part of that broader organizational shift? And how do we proactively start making these adjustments before someone tells us what to do or makes those decisions for us, because we are the experts in the space? How do we inform our own evolution? But I think you can take it even a step further. I believe there's also a question around the broader set of functions that an organization might have that do related work. Let's call it the enablement function consolidation. Because right now, especially if you work in a large enterprise, you might have dedicated learning and development, talent development management, knowledge management, internal communications. Maybe you have functional enablement teams like sales enablement, kind of different functions embedded within different lines of business. A lot of people doing similar types of work. And when you kind of take this more ecosystem approach or mentality to the work, I believe we're also looking at a world where we might start to consolidate those functions under a broader umbrella of enablement. I have long been confused as to why corporate communications and learning and development not only aren't the same function, but a lot of times we're at odds with one another. We use different tools, have different priorities, but we're all acting in service of similar outcomes, right? Making sure people have the information they need to make good decisions and do their jobs effectively. But a lot of times we clash. And then the employee on the other side is getting different experiences, right? They go to one tool to get certain types of information. They go to another tool to get other types of information. So as the tools consolidate, and maybe I'm working with a dedicated application through which I get a lot of different types of information, the question becomes, does the function on the other side consolidate? So maybe it's not about entirely there's less people involved in these different functions. Maybe it's people are doing different types of work across the enablement story. So as an instructional designer, it maybe is not just about building instructional content. Maybe it's also about building communications content or using different tools to foster different types of information delivery. And that brings me to the last piece of our conversation before we dive into Q&A, which is the individual. So if our function starts to evolve, right? If technology starts to take that middle piece of the ecosystem, and now we're acting in service of amplifying and enabling an ecosystem, where do the people fit into the story in this kind of consolidated enablement story? Well, I think the biggest mistake we could make is wrapping our arms around what we do today as tightly as possible and saying things like, AI can't do it as good as I can. I don't necessarily disagree with that sentiment in a lot of ways. However, I also don't believe that's how decisions are made in a lot of organizations. Because the frank reality is that if an organization can maybe get 300 times the output at maybe 70% of the quality that they're getting today, they might make that decision. So it's not just about quality. It's a balancing act, again, between the outcomes I'm trying to drive and the risk associated, and in some cases, the third dimension being the cost associated in getting those outcomes. So I believe we need to take, as professionals, a certain mindset into this conversation. One, the workplace is changing. We don't get to decide if that happens. We have to prepare, or we risk being left behind if we hold on too tight to how things are done today. Legacy work is not the benchmark. Like I said, what was good and valued yesterday is not necessarily what is good and valued tomorrow. I felt that personally. When my team was doing great work, everyone was very excited about it. Organizational priorities changed, layoffs happened, and what was important yesterday suddenly wasn't important today. It's that same reality. We're making sure that we understand how organizational decision makers think, how they make these types of decisions, and how we can prepare for it. But at the end, it's not about the future being determined by what you do today. In my opinion, it's guided by what you can do tomorrow. Reframing how we think about the work that we do so it's in service of where we're going, not where we've been. So the most important thing I think anyone in this profession, or literally anywhere in the workplace, but especially in a skills-focused function like L&D can do, is take a hard look at what you can do. Assess your skills, not the tasks you complete, but the capabilities you bring to the conversation, and start asking, well, if the world's evolving in the direction that we're talking about today, where are my skills most relevant? Where can I contribute value in different ways? Maybe I'm going to do something completely different, but it's about what I bring to the table in terms of capability that not just that AI or a machine can't do, but I'm uniquely able to help the organization achieve outcomes by doing those things. So again, two really quick generic examples, but just to get people thinking. Let's take an instructional designer. What tasks might you do today? Well, everything from conducting task analysis, building learning content, maybe evaluating the impact of training. How do you break that task list into the set of skills that you bring? right? The ability to design an experience, to manage a project, to write really effectively. One of the most undervalued and underutilized skills, I think, in the workplace is being great at writing. And now, through the lens of skill, well, how do I apply it in a new version of an enablement ecosystem? Well, it might be about curating insights that the technology can use in order to support people in their performance. It might be more about managing projects and a little bit less about creating content. It might be about crafting those broader campaigns, right? Instead of just focusing on instructional content, maybe it's a lot of different types of materials. And of course, maybe there's those high-end activities, advanced simulations, right? Rich media content that AI, at least at this point, can't completely do that might deliver unique value in the workplace. And let's say that maybe you're a program manager or you're a consultant. Same conversation. Well, what do you do today? Managing tasks, working with stakeholders, tracking and reporting on results. What skills do those bring to the table? I'm going to highlight influence on that one. I think the most important skill L&D professionals need moving forward is influence, the ability to help people think differently, whether it's the people we support or the people we collaborate with. And then how do you apply those skills in a different way through the lens of an AI-enabled workplace, fostering cross-functional alignment, aligning what your function does and what the ecosystem can do around enablement with the right business priorities, getting stakeholders on board, again, using existing skills or evolving your skills in the direction of where they'll be most value add moving forward. So to start to summarize our conversation, then see what questions we've got, I think this is a much better quote than the quote that I started with today around AI won't take your job, someone using AI will. You can't do today's job with yesterday's tools and expect to be in business tomorrow. It's common sense, but I think it's a meaningful idea to embrace as we try to navigate forward to say, what does learning enablement look like in the workplace moving forward? So starting with that, how is work changing? How are the changes to work force us to adapt our tools, our processes, and our practices? And then how do we as individuals adapt our mindset and our skills to deliver value in the next version of work? So to wrap up a couple suggestions before we dive into Q&A, what can you do right now to prepare for the not so distant future of enablement in the workplace? One, stop chasing the tech. It's gonna keep moving. Think further down the path. Take a note from Wayne Gretzky, who said, don't skate where the puck is, skate where the puck is going. So how do you collaborate with people in your organization to understand how work is shifting? And how do we prepare for that rather than focusing on specific technologies right now? That's the big picture. Be selfish, right? One of the worst jokes about learning and development is how little time we spend on our own learning and development. So how do we make sure we're taking time as much as we can, because we have jobs to do, we have fires to put out, but we need to be thinking strategically about how we evolve the function before someone does that for us. Take a hard look at what you're capable of, what your skills are today, and how you might be able to redefine your value proposition in your function and organization moving forward. Take every opportunity you can to proactively embrace new tools instead of pushing them away or saying it can't do it the way I can do it. Well, maybe what you're doing today needs a rethink because you can deliver value differently tomorrow. And finally, the better relationships we can have across the organization, the better decisions we're going to make. So we talk a lot about a seat at the table. I think it goes well beyond that. It's how do we get into the different conversations that your IT partners are having, or your operations partners are having, to understand how are they thinking about evolving work? How are they thinking about AI? And how do we align with that rather than acting in a silo and maybe making decisions that don't align with how the rest of the workplace is changing? Because fundamentally, I don't believe AI will take your job. I believe your organization's applying technology to change how work is done. And that's the picture that we have to paint together to understand the future of learning and enablement in the workplace. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I wrote a lot of what I just talked about out in a 12,000 word additional chapter to the modern learning ecosystem. So if you go to jdwroteabook.com, that's a real website, and you enter the secret code, you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the next chapter, enter the code 1004. Drop me a note if you know why that number. It's a fun movie reference. It'll give you access to a PDF that you can kind of walk through this digital transformation story. Feel free to share it with your peers. Free download. And if there's anything I can do in addition to answering as many questions as I can in the next couple of minutes, happy to help. Let's connect on LinkedIn, keep the conversation going. And in a world where there's every 5 minutes there's a webinar about AI or a new tool or how you can design content differently. Hopefully, this conversation around how we think about the evolution of function and role is helpful to make you make informed decisions or help you make informed decisions as the workplace changes around us. But with that said, I'll hand back to Nicole to see what questions I can get through in the next couple of minutes.
Wonderful. Yes, we do have quite a few for you, JD. So I'll try to get through most of them, or maybe some of these I can group into some commonalities. One that came up kind of often was just a little, I know you touched on them here, but just a little bit more advice on like what types of tools should L&D professionals really be leaning into to stay current or think even beyond, or even in what they're doing today, through content creation. There's so many things, there's so many tools available. Like, how do you keep up?
Don't chase the tech. So it comes back to what I said earlier. The What are the broader implications of these types of shift towards more automated tools, and how do we prepare for that? But if you're trying to make a decision as to where to put investment, right, you can't go get everything. You can't subscribe to every possible tool. I have a relative arsenal of tools that I use in my day-to-day work. There are tools I would like to use. I don't have unlimited money. So focus on what the biggest problem is that you can solve that one will help you evolve how you do your job. So, evolve your own practices. And two, will show value to the organization to kind of reconfirm, oh, the learning and development function and their teams are evolving and finding new ways to add value and help us solve problems that we meaningfully care about. So if you can attach decisions around investment in technology and AI and evolution of practice to meaningful problems that stakeholders care about, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, yeah, we got lots of questions around that as well, of like where to start. Where is that foothold? Like, is there a certain, um, area of a department or a process where you've seen other companies be really successful, kind of getting off the ground with AI?
I think that the technology that has the most promise, especially to fundamentally shift a lot of the equation around learning and development, especially coming back to where I focus in frontline workers, is the conversation around digital assistance. If you read the book, The Modern Learning Ecosystem, you'll find that I think the foundation of learning at work is access to information, just like it is in everyday life. So if people can find what they need, find it in a way that they can apply it, it fundamentally changes what you focus on as learning and development because people can self-serve their way just like they do solving everyday problems. So that's where I believe you're starting to see digital assistants pop up in different use cases, including in the frontline workforce, where it's helping people find information, sift through SharePoints and drives and training information, all the places all of that information lives, but do it in a way that not only can I understand, but maybe even my preferred language, maybe in my preferred reading level. So the ability to use AI to level set the knowledge sharing conversation, I think is a great place to start because suddenly when people can get access to information and you can use it in an actionable way, they might not need that training anymore. So it rebalances where we can focus as L&D. So if you're going to look at one use case, I think that's a great one. And I think it also helps eliminate some of the challenges people have with trusting AI because instead of trying to manage the information of the world, which is a lot of what a lot of public chatbots do, you can gate the information down to just a set of resources that you control, which boosts reliability and consistently considerably. So that's why I think you see the chatbot conversation or the digital assistant conversation coming up more and more.
Yes, yes, of course. And as it relates to language and AI, it's where Smartcat really thrives. So if you're like me, getting pressure from your executive team or those around you, like, hey, how are you using AI? How are you being more efficient? Smartcat can definitely be one of those answers for you. But I use Smartcat for AI and to be more productive for my learning courses, all of that. But a little bit different angle to this discussion that I really wanted to touch on was someone asking, as someone who's in the learning and talent development profession currently, but also in the job market, if you were in their shoes, how would you approach your job search right now?
I think the most opportunistic thing to do is again that step back and instead of saying I've historically done these jobs or had these roles, and as a result, I'm going to look for those roles. I think now more than ever, that's not necessarily the best way to pursue opportunity because organizations behind the scenes that you might not see, especially if you're not inside that organization, are making decisions around their own talent bases. And you've seen a lot of companies get very public when they say things like, well, in order to open a rec, you need to prove to me why technology can't do this. I know companies are, in fact, having that conversation. It's not just hype around AI. So again, if you take that step back and say, well, what skills do I have, or what am I able to do? And then you look at organization, the types of organizations you want to work with. Where can those skills come into play? And then start figuring out, well, how do you kind of mix and match to figure out where does that fit, right? What skills can you deliver value, use to deliver value in different ways? And then the question starts to become, well, when people are recruiting, are they still going to look for job titles and the number of years that you spent with a certain title? Or are they going to value your ability to demonstrate skills? And I think we're in the middle of that conversation right now because a lot of people talk about having a skills-based talent strategy, right? Hiring for skill. But I still see a lot of people doing very traditional talent acquisition when it comes to number of years, degrees, those types of things. So I think it's important to take a skills assessment, kind of, again, see where the puck is going, not where the puck is today, and start advancing or developing yourself in that direction. And if you maybe are going to look at applying for roles that you have traditionally held in the past and leaning more to where you are today, how can you speak to your ability to do it differently? Right, to deliver value in different ways, to be more efficient and more capable. But I will 100% empathize with the fact that if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see I post jobs in L&D every day. And I've been watching job descriptions evolve over the past 3.5 years at this point. I can test. It is very difficult right now.
Yeah.
Um, so the last thing I would say around job hunting is don't do it yourself. The more you can collaborate with people, whether people have maybe found opportunities, people who are in roles right now and seeing these changes take place, people are also hunting for opportunity. Um, I think you're better off working with a team and making it a team effort. One of my favorite influencers talks about having a kitchen cabinet of people that you trust that can help come up with creative ideas and new ways to position you and your value and your skills. So I would work with people to find opportunity and not just do the traditional process of resume, apply, wait. I
Yes.
think that's going to be a much harder process.
Yes, agree. I love that. I love really applying your skills more broadly because learning happens all over organizations. Like my marketing team trains the sales teams anytime we have a new product launch. Sales enablement does learning. It happens in so many different pockets and not just within L&D departments for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, that is all the time we have today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, JD, for being here with us today. Please use all the great resources that he provided today to further your learning and to bring AI and your skills development along the process with you. And of course, if you need anything, you're always welcome to reach out to Smartcat as well. We're here for you too. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.